Hey, it's Keith here. As you may have noticed, this is not the episode we had hinted at last time. Since we could not do the recording this week, we decided that we were going to release an episode that we had done back in September in the before times. So just sit back and enjoy this episode, and we should be back to our normal schedule as of April 20th when the next episode comes out.
Welcome to yet another episode of What Is My Podcast About? A podcast where we bi-weekly try to figure out what we want to talk about for our podcast for future episodes. And as always, once again, I am joined by our beloved guests, well, not guests, but co-hosts.
Happy to be here on my first time guest appearing on this show.
Peter.
Hi.
And Keith.
Hi, first time being on the podcast, long time listener.
Sorry, did you want to introduce yourself there too, sir?
Sure, may as well.
Because I'm new here, I don't know.
Yeah, who are you?
Well, I am the not-so-beloved host, Matthew.
The not-so-beloved host, Matthew, and his two beloved guests, Peter and Keith. Awesome. So, how you guys doing? What's up with your lives?
Well, there's a hurricane bearing down on us. It's not great, but I can't wait.
So, as a bit of a spoiler for some of the people who are coming out, this will probably not get released right away. You know, hurricanes tend to mess up stuff like that. So I want to talk about something that happened recently. So we did recently record our D&D not our D&D podcast. Oh god, this is the D&D podcast. We recently recorded our board game podcast, during which I brought up some ridiculous games that actually exist in the real world. One of which, if you were listening, you'll remember, was the Bob Ross Art of Chill board game. Matt recently came into the boardroom where I work with a couple friends and got a chance to play the Bob Ross Art of Chill game.
Yeah, Peter so graciously brought the board game before me, just proving without a doubt that it actually exists, and my god, it is actually really fun.
It's super enjoyable. It's just like a very chill game about like watching the Bob Ross TV show and painting paintings along with it. What were your impressions, Matt?
It was oddly strategic.
Yes, it's a very strategic game where you have to know exactly what paints you need to collect in order to paint specific features.
Just like the life of Bob Ross.
Exactly. Oddly strategic. He was a maniacal mastermind.
And kind of similarly, very close in respect to my favorite board game, Splendor. In the objective of collecting things to gain points.
Yeah, you gotta collect specific resources and use those resources to kind of trade in for specific things. Yeah, definitely has a bit of a Splendor vibe. I never really thought about that before, but you're not wrong.
It's a very standard board game format.
Yes. So what are we talking about today, boys? I think I already kind of fucked it up and said, but let's say it again.
So today's episode, we're going to revisit the topic of Dungeons & Dragons. As we did in a previous episode, we talked about the same thing, except last time we talked about the game more as from the perspective as a dungeon master. This time, we're tackling the behemoth of the game as a player would.
And we know what you're thinking back there at home. What? How? 2 D&D episodes? That was already my favorite episode. We get another? Yes, we are all well aware it was your favorite episode. We're not just trying to cash in on that. We have a lot more to say about D&D, I think you'll find.
I mean, I'm trying to cash in on it.
Keith, we haven't even added sponsors yet.
Sweet internet points.
They don't exist. They're not real material points.
Say that to Bitcoin.
Just
say that to Bob Ross.
All I'm trying to say is, for everyone at home, look forward to our ongoing series where we do episode 3 and 4 also on D&D.
Coming out sometime.
Coming out after we have sponsors that need to capitalize on
I want to do
that.
an episode purely about mounts.
I want to do an episode purely just about diseases and how you get them and how you get rid of them.
It's greater restoration.
Greater restoration, yes. That's how you get rid of them. But how do you get them? Sex with women.
Anyway, those are topics for future episodes.
Or goblins.
Or goblins.
Anyway, for this episode, what did you guys want to talk about?
Sorry about that.
Well, I thought we were talking about the player perspective.
Well, yes, but specifically. I need specifics, guys.
The part I want to talk about mainly is the thing you really start off with is making your character, going through the rule books, rolling your dice to get your stats, what to pick, all that fun stuff. The mechanical side of things.
I also, surprisingly enough, wanted to talk about kind of the aspect of creating a character. But rather than focusing on the mechanics, I more so wanted to focus on like building the character itself and like the story that you're telling with your character, and how to build both a lasting story that's interesting to you as well as one that it's easy to kind of build up on, and how to roleplay your character going forward.
Well, this seems a somewhat narrowly topicked podcast then, because I too wanted to talk about creating players, mainly from the perspective of a new time player, since I have vastly less experience than both of you in Dungeons and Dragons playing.
Yeah, I think you're the newest player out of all of us, and you probably remember making your first character.
Oh yeah, because
I don't remember making my first character. I remember my first character. I don't remember making them though.
Yeah, I remember my first character. I have no memories of actually making them. I've made a couple characters in my day. Let's just put it that way.
Got a book of them.
Yeah.
And in just vanilla D&D, I have 3 characters, and that's it.
Yeah, in total?
What are the names?
In total. The first one's name was Thexius. He was a tiefling sorcerer. The second one was a fighter, a dwarf, by the name of, I forget his name, but it was based off of Yukon Cornelius from the good old Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer show.
I think it was just Cornelius.
Yes, it was Cornelius, right. He was cast out from his clan, so he didn't have a last name anymore. And then the third character his name is Midas, and he is humanoid.
I like how you leave out specifics when you say humanoid. Just because you never know who's going to listen to this podcast and find out secrets about your character you might not want them to know.
Well, yeah, that is an ongoing campaign. I believe I DM'd all of those characters.
I believe I have played alongside all of those characters and have had relations with each of them.
True.
I'm not specifically have any direct relations with Midas, but I was, what was the first one's name?
Thexius.
Thexius. I was Thexius's brother in that campaign. Even when Thexius became a woman, I was still his brother. He just became my sister. And then, I don't know that we ever got far enough into the campaign for this to be revealed, but Cornelius, I'm just going to throw out the spoiler now because I don't know that we're ever going to go back to it. I was actually Cornelius's old boss.
What?
Who also got expelled from his troop.
Okay.
And I recognized Cornelius, but just didn't say anything because I was just a little bit embarrassed about our shared history.
Yeah, now the reason I did that was because when I got both your character backstories, you had the exact same backstory. I was like, I have to combine these now. Both it was made a horrible decision on the battlefield that caused it, and one of the characters' backstory was they were commander in the army, and one was that they were leading a squad in the army. And it's it makes sense that the commander would have made a call that caused the squad to just get wiped out, except for this one guy who blames himself for it.
And that's part of what I like about making a character is finding one idea that you'd like and would like to expand on role-playing as, and make that a significant anchor of your character's background story. Don't fully flesh out the background around the character, because then that really shoehorns the DM who's making the world around your character.
Yeah.
And they may be forced into a situation where they have to change something potentially against your will.
Yeah, you want to have it full but vague enough that it can be worked out. Of course, the DM that you have might have other ideas of that and is fully fine with you just throwing whatever you want, and they'll use that to just build onto the story depending on how much of the world they have filled out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the logical progression is for us to first talk about your first character and how making your first character can kind of seem, and kind of lessons to be learned from that, and then we'll kind of progress and get more in depth into the character creation aspects.
So, in terms of first character, I notice this quite a bit, is that when you first get into Dungeons & Dragons and you make your first character, more often than not, the person will base the character heavily off them and see it kind of as a surrogate, in a sense, of themselves in this world.
I'm not playing a character, I'm playing myself in this campaign.
Yeah, and that people also tend to get very defensive or upset if anything happens to that character. I've seen it firsthand in campaigns, not Dungeons & Dragons necessarily, but role-playing games, where characters get really attached to what's happening with their character, and any slight turns into issues in real life as well. Do you guys find that's true between people playing their first times?
I've seen multiple players who have watched their first character die, and then decided to stop playing in that entire campaign. And they'll later come back to D&D, but I've seen people take year-long hiatuses because their first character died and they just got a little bit too emotionally attached to their first character. There's nothing wrong with liking your character, getting emotionally attached, but I think if you get to that level of attachment, it can definitely be a bit of a hindrance in the future.
Yeah. But you still have to remember that you have created a character, and it's not your story that you've made the character in. You've made it in the story of another character. So if you're truly attached to that character in that story, then you should be expecting that character to potentially die at some point and be ready for that to happen.
Oh, it's definitely the risk of being in any campaign.
The other, I won't call it a pitfall, but the other decision I see a lot of first-time people making is people who play lots of D&D and who have made lots of characters over time become less focused on building the best possible character. And some characters, or some players will remain focused on making sure they build the best, strongest character. But like a lot of players start to kind of delve into just making characters that are fun or interesting ideas. I do find a lot of first-time players get a little bit too focused on making the best character that they can, to the point where like they don't know what a lot of stuff means, and so they'll end up just like, I know multiple players who have gone online and like Googled what's the best way to build a warlock, what race should I be playing as a warlock, and I don't recommend that if that's what you're going to do for your first character. I think be okay with having a character with flaws, be okay with having a character who's not perfect, and just kind of try stuff out and see what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, and go with what sounds fun or what could be useful. Like, you're a sorcerer. Hey, does teleporting in a cloud of mist seem fun? Go for that spell.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The other one is like the question I always get, because I've DM'd a couple parties, and not as a DM, but like from the player's perspective, I've DM'd a lot of people who it's their first time, and the question I always get as the DM is like, should I get proficiency in this? I have like a low charisma score, so it doesn't make sense for me to put proficiency into persuasion, because like I kind of like that, but like it doesn't make sense to me if I'm not good at charisma. And I think you're thinking about it backwards if that's your logic on it, because the fact that you're bad at charisma is more of a reason to put your proficiency into persuasion, because it's going to balance out your negative charisma score. And if persuasion's something that you like and are interested in, it's something you're going to do regardless of whether you're good or not at it. So giving yourself proficiency, if it's a skill you're bad at, is just going to incentivize you to use it more.
And it gives you another goal for your character's growth, because you'll have points throughout the campaign where you can improve that skill.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. One of my favorite things whenever I'm making a character is getting a score in anything under 10.
Yes.
Because that is so fun, because, you know, it's like, okay, this is something I'm going to have to work around later down the line.
Having a character who's got like an 8 in intelligence and like making that decision of like, I know this, but does my slightly dumb character know this? Because like, for those of you who don't know what the numbers mean, a 10 in any score is considered like perfectly average. This is what an average human being would have. So a 10 in intelligence is average intelligence. Below that, you're below average intelligence. So if you have an 8 in intelligence, you're slightly below average intelligence. You're not the sharpest tool in the shed, as the cool kids say. So I love kind of having characters who have lower stats and just like finding a way to bake that into my character, of like a character with low agility, but like crazy high strength, super strong, very unbalanced.
And the thing about, too, is playing Dungeons & Dragons with a group of people, more often than not, the issue should be problem solving based on the skills that the players have in the group. So when you have a character that has not, you know, an average and everything, or even above average and everything, you have those flaws, it makes you think about the game when you're playing it in a much different way, which opens up a whole wide realm of just crazy ideas and thinking around puzzles instead of trying to just barrel through them with just rolling. Because if you're, for example, as you said, bad with intelligence, well, you're going to have to think of another way to address a situation based on the limits of what your character can do. Or if you have really poor strength, well, you're going to approach situations maybe different from the rest of the party is. And you have to think about the game in such more interesting ways, I find, when you put that caveat of, I am very frail. If I get hit by anything, I'm down.
Yeah. So, like, perfect example. Let's say you have low strength and everyone else in your team has, like, moderate strength. Like, they've got, like, 12s and 13s. You've got, like, an 8 for strength. And your party comes up across, like, a big boulder blocking the way down, further down the cave. A lot of people with, like, average strength are probably going to be like, all right, let's just try and push it. And they're going to roll and they're going to fail. And they're just going to be like, one of these days I'm going to roll good enough, and they're not going to really think around that problem. You having a low strength, you're like, there's no chance in hell I'm going to push this. Let me see if there's like wooden board or something around here that I can wedge between it to get some leverage. You start thinking around your problems, and you end up having a lot more fun, like, kind of dealing with the problems. Especially if you have a party where you, like, collectively have very diverse skills and weaknesses.
Yeah.
You have a lot of fun. You got one person in your group who's a big buff strongman, but real dumb. Then you have situations where, like, you have to explicitly explain to him what he has to do, because he's the only one who can physically do it, but he does not understand what has to be done. So you have to be like, no, you need to go over there, and you need to pull the lever and hold the door open until every one of us is through the door. If we're not through the door, don't let go of the lever. And you just have to, like, have that explicit conversation. So I really love, like, baking in weaknesses into characters, because it allows you to have those kind of conversations where it's not just everyone knows exactly what they're doing because they're all jacks of all trades. You have to have some people who are just terrible at some stuff to make it more fun.
Oh, definitely. And it's more in line with probably your future characters down the line, but the whole concept of min-maxing your character.
Yes.
Where you find the ideal situation. And this is a good thing for people who want to play the game, but everyone playing the game has different ways of what is fun to them to play the game. Whether you're, the tactical mastermind in the back throwing off spells, or the big brooding dumb guy in the front that's just kind of knocking everything down. You can min-max your character into, again, there's 6 prime stats that all play very differently depending on what you do. If you're a strength character, you want to be up there fighting all the time. If you're a con character, you're going to be probably more of the tanky one. If you're the intelligence character, you don't want to be in the fight. You're probably trying to talk the situation out before it gets to that point.
Or if you're the charismatic bard, you're just trying to sleep with everyone.
Exactly.
So, perfect example of what min-maxing can look like. We talked about this a little bit during our board gaming episode when we talked about playtesting games. We talked about the campaign you created with superheroes and, like, how you had a pool of stamina and a pool of strength, and, like, seeing, like, how those fights would work out and making sure everything was balanced. And I talked about how, just to test your system, I created a character with minimal, life points and maximal stamina so that, like, I don't have to survive a hit. So long as I put all of my stamina into my hit, whoever I punch is going the fuck down. That's a perfect example of min-maxing. I'm really good at one thing and terrible in every other situation.
Yeah. That'd be the classic glass cannon build, where
Yeah.
you do a lot of damage, but you can't take a lot.
No.
Yeah. But that just goes to show that you don't have to consider the stats too much when first making your character, because no matter with what you have or what you're given with to start, there's always some way to work around what you have.
Oh, yeah, and 5e makes it so easy too, because even if you flip through the book, you can see it gives you the quick start for all the characters. Like, if you're making a fighter, you want to put stats into these two because those are your primary stats.
Yeah. You want to have a high strength and a high constitution. Those are the ones that make the most sense for you. Yeah. At the same time, don't feel like you have to do that. Like, if you do any reading on stuff, like, and you read into, like, how to build specific characters, and you read up on wizards, you'll probably, like, come across stuff that tells you that you probably want to pick a race with a high intelligence, and you want to go glass cannon build, and that's the way most people build their first couple wizards, is you go full glass cannon build, you do a lot of damage, you don't take a lot of damage. The much more fun way, in my mind, is to build the muscle wizard, which you know a couple real basic spells, and other than that, you're just the beefiest boy on the battlefield.
Yeah, if I believe correctly, muscle wizard is level or 2 in monk, and then you take wizard spells, and then you put all of your stuff, like I think you do find familiar, pick octopus, put all of your stuff into grappling, and you just win every fight by choking the dude out.
Yeah. It's a fantastic build, and it's just not the kind of stuff that, like, seems immediately obvious.
Well, that's the fun of it. The more you play the game, you start getting those little nuggets of ideas like, oh, that would be interesting, and that's where we get into the theory crafting, where a whole bunch of fun possibilities come up, where you build a character who's not necessarily the best character for the game, but it's got some interesting caveats to it.
Like in the campaign we're currently building, or not currently building, currently playing through, one of the characters is essentially built a teleporting assassin, because you put a certain number of levels into monk, you choose the monk Way of the Shadows subclass, which allows you to literally teleport between shadows so long as they're at most 60 feet apart, and then you put the rest of your levels, as soon as you have that skill, into rogue so that you can get sneak attack, and then you just teleport around the room sneak attacking people from the shadows.
Essentially just a ninja.
Essentially just a ninja, but it's the kind of stuff like nothing about monk leads you to believe like that's a thing that you should be doing as a monk. Nothing about rogue like leads you to believe that's the thing you should be doing about rogue. But as you start to play both of them, you realize, wait, that's a really weird connection that I could definitely build if I built both of them. And it's the kind of stuff you just don't think about your first time. And the more characters you build, the more kind of connections you start to recognize, the more interesting stuff you think about.
Oh, definitely. Another good example of this is not necessarily doing multi-classing, but just theory crafting or something else is fighters can also go dex. You don't have to go strength or fighter.
Yeah.
And being a fighter that focuses on ranged attacks is also a very interesting way to play it.
Yes. That being said, you gotta have that conversation with your party. I was a part of a group once when our party was all discussing what classes we were gonna go, and there's a couple new players, and one of the new players said he was gonna build a fighter, and we're all like, cool. We didn't really have a frontline fighter at this point. We had 2 spellcasters. We had, I think it was a sorcerer, a bard, and we had a cleric, and then he was like, I'm going to go fighter. And the rest of us were all like, that's great. Now we got a fighter, we got a frontline fighter. So the cleric went more like Path of Light, wasn't really like super concerned with getting up in the middle, the thick of it, was more concerned with also staying back spelling now that we have a fighter in our midst. Little did we know, fighter was building a ranged fighter, and now we have no one who wants to get into the fight and everyone who wants to stand back as far as possible. And it was just like, it's a great way to build your character. Make sure if you're building a non-standard kind of character, the rest of your party knows about it so that they know what gaps are still existent in your party.
And that's a fun thing to think about, too, because when you're making a character, you're usually sitting down with the party and talking about what you want to do. The party dynamic is nothing to do with the DM. That is all on the party themselves to figure out how they want to try to build that party up to fit weaknesses, or just everyone plays whatever they want.
Yeah. I always find it funny when I've been DMing groups and like they're setting up their party dynamic and people message me and they're like, do you think we need a cleric? And I'm like, I don't really care. I'll be fine if you guys don't have a cleric. I'll be fine if you guys do have a cleric. You should decide amongst yourselves whether you guys want to have a cleric. If you want to have a healer, yeah, build a cleric. If you don't have a cleric, I'm not going to fuck you over and put you in like really taxing situations that require you to heal yourselves. I'll find ways around it or give you access to stuff that'll heal you.
Don't have a cleric. What's that? You're going to be fighting undead for the first 3 sessions.
Yeah, so it's an important discussion to have with the other players in your party more so than with the DM himself. Yes, you want to include the DM and like make him aware of what you're doing, but it's much more important that like all of the players at the table know what kind of dynamic you're building as a party. My favorite examples of this is I forget what the podcast was, but I was listening to a podcast a while back. And all the players decided they were just going to build characters independently. And then they came together. Turns out they had all built barbarians without knowing it, because they all agreed a class they hadn't played a lot before. And the DM, not knowing they were going to do this, built a session around a lot of intelligence-based puzzles at the beginning. And so they just punched their way through like a wizard's tower. And
if I recall, they came across their hidden lair. The first one's like, okay, due to some obscure background information about my character's creation, I know how to pick locks or cast this particular unlock spell. He tries to wave his wand, nothing happens, and then it clicks in his mind. Oh yeah, I'm a barbarian.
and he just busts the wall down.
And they just beat up all the wizards and just take what they want from the lair.
Now, I'm going to be honest, Peter. When you started telling that story about all the characters...
You thought I was going to tell the
If you were going to say cleric, that was this podcast.
Yeah.
That was me.
As I was telling this story, I was tempted to say clerics just to say... I don't remember what podcast I heard it on, but I remember listening to a podcast and hearing people talk about creating a bunch of clerics.
Now, we did talk about Matt's first character, but we didn't really touch on ours too much there. Do you remember your first D&D character?
I do. I don't... So, one thing I'll say before I go into my first character too much. An important decision to make when you build your first character is making sure you're with the right party of people. Because my first D&D character made it to 3 sessions, and then I decided D&D was not for me because the people I was playing with were fucking terrible, and they ruined D&D for me. And I was just like, cool, never playing D&D again. And it wasn't until, like, I think a year later I went back and I was like, let's try it with different, more cool people. And the more cool people were great. And I was like, all right, D&D's actually super awesome. So the first character I ever created was a gnome wizard by the name of Mr. Timnus. I actually added him as NPCs to later campaigns, but he was a character whose entire, like, his backstory, I really liked the character. It was a shame. I just hated the fucking campaign. He was a character whose entire existence was built around serving others. So anytime anyone asked him to do something, even, like, as a joke, if someone was like, man, sucks that there's a dragon, like, collecting taxes from everyone in this town. Do you think you could get rid of him? Like, my character would devote his entire existence into, like, solving this problem for them until someone diverted his attention by asking him to do something else. So, like, there was times when, like, the mayor found out about my character in, like, the second session and, like, asked him to do exactly that. He asked me to get rid of a dragon that was, like, collecting taxes from the town. I was like, cool, off to go do that, and I left. This was partially just because I wasn't a very experienced player, and I was just like, cool, I'll do whatever I'm told. And, like, the party actually, like, chased after me, like, no, don't do that. It's like, I was asked to. I gotta do what I was asked. And the party's like, how about instead of that, you, bake a cake? Yeah, it'd be great if you baked a cake for me right now. And my character's like, alright, cool, I'll do that instead then.
My first character was a half-elf fighter, and my first time playing the campaign, it was not one of your standard D&D campaigns, because what the Dungeon Master for this one ended up doing was we all were children from this one village, and during, like, a festival, the gazebo ate us or something like that. I can't remember the exact details, but essentially we got sucked through a gazebo into another dimension.
All right.
So we had no skills whatsoever going in. We didn't hit level 1 until we got to this other world, because classes didn't exist until then, essentially.
Yeah.
So we just kind of pick it up. So I ended up going with the fighter class to kind of round out the team. We had a druid, a gnome wizard, funny enough. We had a good core. We had a really foul-mouthed dwarven fighter, who I believe was, like, it was definitely, like, a penis joke in the name, but I can't remember it at the moment.
Thorin Thundershaft, or whatever was the character from You had you created a dwarf NPC that had a penis joke in his name.
It might have been, honestly. But essentially, the whole idea was we were trying to get back to our world for the campaign.
Yeah.
But my character, like, I wasn't sure how to play the game properly, so the character, the guy who was DMing just said, just play until, like, your character realizes, like, what does my character like? Oh, he's a fighter. What do fighters like? Weapon? Maybe he just really likes knives. So I had this fighter that just really liked knives.
Nice.
And, in a complete shift on things, the first town we came to, so, again, remembering the whole quest, the point of it is to get back to our own dimension. We get to the city, find the city just fucking hates gnomes. Like, hates gnomes with a passion. Like, gnomes are hanging off the walls and everything like that. We get into the town, we find a gnome slum. And we come up with the great idea. It's like, it kind of sucks for these guys. Maybe we can help them. Proceed to, 30 sessions later, we're still in this town. We've built up the slums into this massive, like, gnome populace, and I am training an army of gnomes to lead the battle.
Were they all equipped with knives?
Multiple weapons, but there's knives with everybody.
Good.
So the city, like, pretty much the campaign devolved into the city who fucking hate gnomes, trying to destroy this, and we just kind of had to defend it every week.
I like that.
We never finished that campaign.
Can't imagine why not.
Same campaign, we had another person who wanted to play, like, this, a rogue character. But he didn't go the standard rogue, like, there were some standard rogue things in there. But the best thing about it was, this character was named Slippery John. Everyone hated him, but he wasn't like, came from like, oh, I was orphaned and on the streets. He was just a really weird guy in the town. He still had his family, lived in a nice home, but he was just really fucking weird. And we had so many good moments of him being weird with the party and doing just nonsensical stuff. Like, there was a time where, as soon as we went into the third dimension, we got captured by these evil people and thrown into a jail cell. And me and him were in the same cell, and we came up with a plan to get loose. So, essentially, he was going to hide. And then I was going to call the guards, like, oh, he disappeared. What happened to him? And we were in the sewers at this point. So he ends up crawling through just waste and shit and, like, up to the guard. So we can't see him. He just comes out with a knife and starts stabbing the guys. Like, the DM's like, so I think this guy just dies right off the bat just from, the sheer amount of not surviving the con check from this knife being stabbed him that was just covered in shit.
Yeah.
Or there's a part where the player had to disappear for a couple of weeks. So he wasn't in the session. So when he came back, the DM's like, well, I want you to explain to us why Slippery John was not present. Because when he shows up, he's wearing, like, French military gear from, like, the 1800s, like the Napoleon getup. And it's like, what happened to you? And he tells us this huge story about how he was on run from the guards, and there was a part where he slipped into the mayor's town, into his house. And they were having dinner, so he sat down at the table, started having dinner with them. Well, they're all free. He's like, "Who are you?" And he just acted like nothing was wrong. He starts hitting on the guy's daughter. And he's like, "How dare you?" And he starts hitting on the mayor. And ends up causing, like, the mayor of this town to actively lead a military campaign against our little gnome hovel.
Oh my god, that's amazing.
But he was like, at this point, so he ended up becoming like a hero of the people, wearing his. Oh, I forgot to mention, it's bright yellow, the military attire that he's wearing. So, standard rogue, but done differently.
So that reminds me of, I don't know how, but it reminds me of something else I wanted to talk about, which was the concept of derailing a campaign. I don't know what about what you just said reminded me of this, but clearly something did. Because I know that can be a real concern for some players. Some players, it's absolutely not a concern. But some people are
almost
like...
seems like it's like their goal.
Yeah, some people, it's their goal to derail the campaign. But some players are like, oh no, I did this. Did I, like, derail the campaign? Am I, like, ruining it or anything like that? And honestly, I think the general rule of thumb is if the DM says something and you respond to it, you're not derailing the campaign. So, for instance, if the DM, like, introduces you to a town and talks about how, like, gnomes are very mistreated in a town, and you fixate on this and, like, try to build a better life for the gnomes, you're not derailing the campaign because the DM left it open for you there. And if it's not where he wanted it to go, frankly, it's on his own fault for putting so much detail in how the gnomes are being mistreated. However...
An example of that, actually, is I listen to quite a few Dungeons & Dragons podcasts and stuff. There's a group outside Xbox or YouTube channel.
Yes.
And there was a recent one that we were talking about derailing campaigns where the DM mentioned how he gave a little too much information, causing an issue where they were looking for some details about the missing son of the mayor guy or whatever.
Yeah.
And he gave them information about something getting picked up at the dockyards, which actually was just in reference to the furniture. And they spent like 40 minutes at the dockyards trying to find something that did not exist, and he didn't know what to do.
Yeah. So as a general rule of thumb I have, if your DM says something and you fixate on that detail, you're not really derailing the campaign, you're just finding details to focus on. But if it's a completely different situation where your DM says something like you're sailing past an island and it seems like a rather small island with like one major port on the front and some steep cliffs around the rest. And your response is, well, let's sail around those cliffs and look for like hidden caves that people like maybe aren't as aware about. Oh, do I see any caves? Oh, I found a cave. All right. Is there any secret passages in these caves that lead to like a smuggling ring or something like that? The moment you start trying to create details, that's when you're derailing the campaign. So the DM gives you details and you fixate on those details, I would not consider it derailing the campaign. Even if it's not at all what the DM expected you to go, you're snagging onto details that he has created. If you're trying to create details to snag onto, then you're absolutely derailing the campaign.
Yeah, and that ties into one of the biggest things about role-playing your character, where that can cause issues of derailing the campaign even though you don't want to. And that's something that I feel like as you get more experienced in playing Dungeons & Dragons 2, you realize it's much easier to walk that line, where some players, when they're new to the game, they'll say, no matter what, I have to do exactly what my character would do. But when you play more, for example, say a new person's joining the party, well, naturally, if your character's a mistrusting person, they're going to be like, no, that person can't come with us. And you'll have to spend a whole session having to build that bond between them. Whereas if you're more experienced in playing and the new character joins, you'll find a reason why your character would, and then approach it from that angle instead of just outright saying no. Same with, that derailing. If you get a piece of information, that information will completely derail the campaign for a couple of sessions. You can choose not to act on it, and then explain why through your character's motivations.
I think the perfect example of this is anytime a player for their first character chooses to build a paladin. We've all experienced it, because as you're reading through the player's handbook and you're reading up on paladins, you realize each of them make certain oaths to their gods. Like, I have an oath of devotion, I have an oath of protection, and stuff like that. Anytime a player creates a paladin for their first character, they always lean into it just like a little bit too hard, and they're like, nope, can't do that. It's against everything I agreed as a paladin. And it's just like, at a certain point, you have to realize that, like, There are things your paladin would do. Maybe it doesn't seem to fit with what the book said, but you have to make certain concessions, otherwise the campaign is just not going to progress. If every time your party's like, we have to kill these goblins, you can't be the player going, nope, I have to protect the goblins because someone is seeking to kill them. Can't be the person who's constantly opposing your party because it doesn't fit with what your oath tells you.
Yeah, you're not signing a contract when you're making a character. You're choosing a framework to build off of.
Yeah. So you can always just, like, build into it. Like, for example, there's the Oath of Devotion where you make an oath where you promise to, like, be devoted to your god and follow all of their rules. And then there's also, like, the Oath of Protection where you make the oath that you're going to protect those in need. But you can rework that around. And instead of it just being anyone your party decides needs to die is someone you need to protect, you can just rephrase that as the fact that your party wants to kill them means that they're probably going to try and kill your party in response. And so you can just say that you're protecting the members of your party from death in the same way. You don't have to always fight for fucking lawful good, true justice. You can build a character that is a paladin without building a character that's a pain in the ass.
Oh, definitely. And to be fair, paladin is one of the harder ones to play, especially as a first time.
Yeah.
Which I guess is also balanced out by the fact that it's probably one of the best classes you can also play.
Oh, it's phenomenal when you know what you're doing.
Because what was it, 5e alone? I'd say probably the best classes to play, just ability wise. Bard's definitely number one with how 5e's built.
Yeah.
Then it would be fighter and paladin.
Yeah.
Spellcasters tend to be good, but since they have so many drawbacks of you can hit them, they tend to be more middle tier. And then monk and ranger just kind of got shit on in 5e.
Ranger had a real rough go of it.
Yeah.
They had to, everyone, commented when it first came out about how much they fucked over the Ranger in the process, that they revised it and came out with another version of the Ranger just to fix everyone's complaints about the Ranger.
But, it didn't even, it helped it a bit, but not enough to make it,
no,
as good as the other three mentioned classes that would be, the top tier ones.
Yeah. The Bard, Fighter, and
Paladin
are all phenomenal.
Yeah, but despite what's good or bad, my recommendation for if you're making your character for your first time is read through the descriptions of the characters, not necessarily all the details behind all the character mechanics, and just choose a class that you like, choose a race that you like, and build your kind of background around that. Because my first character was a sorcerer. I chose sorcerer because in all video games and things I've always chose caster classes before. I've always liked the magic aspect.
Yep.
And also since it was my first character as a sorcerer, I'd stay back at range, so I'd technically be a little safer in combat to play around with the mechanics. Technically at times. And
yeah, one thing I highly recommend if you're going to build your first character is don't read the stat mechanics for the characters at first when you're making your decisions. Each of the options you make, so you'll make an option, or the main three decisions you make when you're building your character, at least in 5e, is you have to pick your race, your class, and your background. And then there's some other minor choices, but they're all kind of made within those three main choices.
Yeah.
And each of those main choices, it'll say, one of the classes is a dwarf, and it'll say these are all the stats about the dwarf, but before it says any of the stats, it gives a brief description of what life as a dwarf is like. And if you just read those descriptions of what life is like as a dwarf, what life is like as a dragonborn, what life is like as an elf, it can kind of give you a much better idea of, this actually seems really interesting to me, I want to build a character around this. Then you read the same thing from the classes, and it gives you examples of, bards, playing money to try and earn coins on the side of the road, or, telling tales in the biggest bars and earning lots of money from all of their adoring fans and stuff like that.
Or being responsible for all the humanoid monsters that are out in the field.
Yeah. All of the half-human, half-something else are all probably a bard's mistake.
Yep.
Not progress or not, responsible for the bard. They're his mistakes, and he knows it.
He knows what he did.
So, yeah, it gives you this kind of brief world description of what the choices you're making are without actually telling you all the specific numbers. And I find if you focus on that, it allows you to build a character you're invested in without getting so bogged down on what's the best way to build a character.
yeah, and then it's easier to focus on trying to play to what that character would be about. It's easier to learn how to role play, I guess, to put it easily.
Exactly. When I built my first character, that's pretty much what I did. I, read up on the different classes And, like, gnomes sound super fun to me, because they're just, like, tiny people who are constantly, like, as a people, avoiding conflict as much as possible. I'm like, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. And then similar to you, I wanted to be a spellcaster, because in a lot of video games I've played before, and a lot of times when I made that kind of decision, spellcasting is always super fun, and it gives you a lot more freedom, in my experience, than kind of physically getting up in there. In my recent adventures with characters, I've had a lot more fun being the physical in the middle of the fight, because I find that fucking amazing and super enjoyable.
Yeah, and I believe, actually, Matt, you mentioned once to me that going from your first character to your second character, going from the spellcaster who had to micromanage so much, to just walking up and punching the guy across the room. You felt so good being able to do that.
Yeah. My huge revelation for how fun that class was, and that sudden change in playstyle from what I was used to, was our first combat interaction.
You paused to think about what spells you had.
No, I ended up starting it because a bunch of guards came into the tavern we were in, and they wanted to take us hostage or take us somewhere to work or whatever. We'd never finish the campaign.
Yeah, they were going to take one of your traveling companions.
Yes, right. And I was just there frantically trying to figure out what to do to stop them. And then I'm like, wait, I'm a dwarf. I'm a fighter. I don't have spells. I just walk up to the guy and headbutt him. And combat starts. And it was great.
Yeah. It's very freeing playing as a melee fighter, because you just don't have to think about shit anymore.
Yep.
Although, that being said, the next character that I plan on making, now that I have some more experience with the game, is certainly going to involve a lot more thinking. Because it's going to be back to Sorcerer, but his source of his magic's wild magic, so whenever he casts a spell, there's going to be...
I love wild magic.
There's going to be some random effect that happens, like it could turn you or an ally into a potted plant for a turn. But he's also going to be blind. Oh, and I just can't wait to play around with that. All of that.
And that's definitely the thing. When you get more and more into making characters, I have probably 17 characters made that I'll never play, that they're all built around just a singular idea that I had that just seems really fun.
Yeah. I do that all the time. Like, I built a character who their whole deal was that, like, they were blind, and, like, they wore, like, a head wrapper over their eyes. But the whole thing was they had access to the skill blind sight, and, like, I built a custom class that I'm never going to play in an actual campaign, just so that they would, like, walk around and act like a blind person, like, 90% of the time, and then, like, the other 10% of the time be clearly perfectly competent, but, like, also constantly making jokes about something. Like, someone would be like, did you see where he went? And, like, not even asking my character, like, asking the party, and my character would just jump in like, I didn't see anything!
And that's the other beautiful thing, too, of when you get into the theory crafting of just character making. There's so many things you can find online. If you want to make a specific character from your favorite show or anything, you can probably find that online. If you want to make a character of a class that doesn't exist in the game, there's probably homebrews. I've seen Super Saiyan homebrews. I've seen stand users from JoJo listed. I've even seen, this is how you build Captain America or Dante in Dungeons & Dragons.
One of my favorite is I saw one that was how you build all of the different Disney princesses as characters in Dungeons & Dragons. The one slightly frustrating part is, like, 60% of them are bards, because all they do is sing. You got Mulan in there as a fighter, and that's about it.
I'm trying to think, like, okay, yeah, most of them would be singing. I'm going to make a guess here and say that Princess Jasmine was the other non-bard.
Actually, it was Princess Jasmine wasn't, and also Ariel was a rogue, just because she's constantly stealing and collecting things.
I'm guessing Jasmine was probably a ranger or a druid.
Yeah, she was a druid.
Yep. And also Ariel, for the vast majority of The Little Mermaid, could not talk.
Yeah, not a great bard skill.
I mean, to be fair, this is a misunderstanding a lot of people have about bard. Bard doesn't have to be a musician.
No.
I once played an interpretive dance bard.
Yeah.
It's very fun. You can also do a painting bard. You can do a bard that tells stories or jokes.
And isn't there, like, a bard of, like, the School of Swords or something?
Yeah, so it's like kind of like dancing, essentially.
Okay.
And that's the thing. Bard, you just have to have something that performs that. Think of if it can be a street show in any capacity, that's what a bard can be.
Trampolines. Your weapon is a trampoline.
You could be a contortionist bard and it would work.
I love the idea of being a sword-swallowing bard, except, like, the way you attack is you're like, now you try! You just stab people through the mouth.
Or maybe a contortion bard.
Because my friend told me of a character that someone he knew made once. He was a bard, except his main stat was strength. So when he was first making his character, he asked the DM, okay, what kind of weapon can I use as a bard, or what kind of instruments can I have? And the DM's like, just choose whatever you want to play. So he chose a grand piano. He decided to wheel around a grand piano everywhere they went and just flip it on top of enemies they came across.
Also, I just thought of it, but a bard that doesn't speak, you can make a mime.
Yeah.
And just piss off the party even more with your bard shenanigans.
Oh, making a bird who can't speak and is a mime, and so every time you want to do something on your activation, actually miming it out to the other people at the table, and then never being invited to another D&D session.
Because you don't actually even bring actual dice. You just mime rolling a dice.
I'm just imagining him, like, because there are definitely spells that do invisible things, like invisible weapon, and just imagining a bard fighting with an invisible sword and actually dealing damage. It's just such a good idea.
Oh, it's like the Mr. Mime scene from Pokemon Detective Pikachu,
Yeah,
where he gets lit on fire. Oh, boy.
You just need to get... there's got to be a cantrip that just lets you make things invisible.
Yeah.
I think there is.
And just, like, so you apply it to everything you're doing.
And if not, just homebrew it.
Yeah.
Just like homebrew reverse minor illusion.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, man, I got to make that character now.
Oh, that's amazing.
Do another campaign of the legendary 5 barbarians, except with...
Five bards, all
All
with
mimes.
the 7 mimes.
It's just 5 bards, but each one of them's a different type of, like, street performer. You got the sword swallower, the mime, the...
It's just a circus campaign.
Yeah.
And the ringmaster is an evil black dragon.
Alright, so I kind of want to talk a little bit about role-playing your character and what kind of decisions you should be making before playing and what kind of decisions you should be saving until you kind of start playing your character. Because people tend to make one of 2 main mistakes when they kind of build their backstory for their character. And I know I'm usually guilty of one of them. Keith, you'll probably be able to know which of the 2 I'm guilty of as I start to explain them.
Both.
So the first one that people tend to make is they just don't really write a backstory. They don't think about how they fit in the world. They're just like, this is the character I want to build. I'm not too concerned with how it fits into the world. I'm just going to build this character, and that's what will be. And as we start to play, I'll build a character around them. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it gets you a lot more invested in the early sessions if you have a backstory built into your character that you can kind of draw on for early sessions. And also, if you do have a backstory pre-planned out, your DM can pull shit from that for later sessions. Like, if you have a backstory about how, like, you never knew who your father was, your DM can, like, at a later point in the campaign be like, fuck it. The villain of this, like, shorter arc is actually going to be your father. And, like, I had the villain played out. I'm just going to change him slightly to make him be your father, just to add extra emotional impact to this whole fight scene that you guys are going to have to go through.
And that's definitely one of the fun things with being the player and not the DM, is because the DM knows that he's fiddling with things and changing things that already exist. As the player, it's like, he made a whole thing just for me.
And if the DM asks you if they can change a little bit of your backstory, particularly that you're the second-born, but they want to change it to you being the firstborn, expect that your lost father is going to sacrifice you as their firstborn to some demon god.
At the same time, the other mistake that I see people make is they go the complete opposite direction and they write like a 6-page out backstory with like so much detail baked into it. And like you think that would be a great job and super helpful, but instead of like providing more for the DM to pull from, it actually like builds a cage around the DM, and they're like, now I have to, anytime I interact with this player, I have to invoke the fact that his father was a chemist who created the cure for cancer, but in creating the cure for cancer, he decided that he would take on all of the cancer that anyone else would ever get for the rest of time, and so he's just crippled with cancer but can never die. It's like, it's a weird backstory, and it's like super cool that you wrote that, but you're kind of forcing the DM to reference it.
That's probably the player that's going to be DMing in no time.
Yeah. So I find the happy medium is if you can write like a page of backstory, that's great. It gives the DM stuff to read from. If they want to pull stuff from your backstory to make the story more relevant, they have lots of chances to do so. Also, great rule of thumb, anytime you give anything to the DM as a backstory, it is not written in stone that this is what happened. This is your interpretation of events from your past. So if the DM fucks with it a little bit and like changes it so that your twin brother is actually your own self, but you're just disassociating from your own memories, then that's perfectly cool. I know it changes with what you were thinking, but what you were thinking is still valid because that's how you interpreted your past. The DM probably has the reasons for changing your backstory a little bit, and if they do, be all right with that fact.
When I write my backstory, the fun thing I like to do is I kind of I give a lot, but in a vague way. For example, what I like to do is, for example, I'll list my family members and my relationship with them, but I won't give examples of my relationship with them. I'll say, oh, I have a brother who I get along well with, or I have a sister who I can't stand, I have a cold, emotionless father who's distant, and like a caring mother. And then for backstory of like my character, I tend to focus on how my character got to this point without giving specific details. So it's like, oh, he was very smart from a young age, and he self-taught by reading a bunch of books. He was bred to be the leader of something, not exactly saying what it was. So maybe with that, it'll be like, oh, your father was a politician, so you're bred to be the leader of like this region, or maybe he owned a merchant's guild or something like that. You give enough details to explain your character and fill it out, but don't give the details of areas, places, or things that can be filled in.
Plus, that's a great form of backstory because you say stuff like you have a brother you have a great relationship with without giving like too much specifics. Then your DM can just be like, the big bad is actually going to be your brother, and you're like, I had a great relationship with him. It's like, yeah, because he was manipulating you from the start, and he wanted you to join his side when he like finally revealed his plan. It's like leaving that kind of vagueness. Whereas if you said like, I have a great relationship with my brother because he's the paragon of what humanity should be, and he's a perfect person, and then your DM decides I'm going to make him a villain, then you're like, no, that doesn't fit with what I told you about my brother. So leaving that kind of vagueness or open-endedness for your DM to play around with.
That, or you just found out that you're the bad guys.
Yep.
He's the paragon of humanity, and he's the villain. Wait a second.
We're the villains. So, yeah, I just always recommend when you're kind of writing your backstory, leave enough open-endedness that your DM can play around with it, and also have the conversation with your DM. Don't just write out 6 pages all on your own, become committed to them, and then give them to your DM and be like, this is my backstory. But maybe write out like a page version with a lot less detail and be like, this is what I'm thinking. Does that work with you? Do you want to work out some more details with me together? It's a lot better of a way to kind of move forward.
Yeah, that's something I'll do myself. I like to, if I'm going to be a long campaign, you want to make sure that you're sitting down with your DM in some capacity to work out your backstory if you have a lot, just so you don't mess with the world as a whole. But if it's a short one-off, usually doesn't matter, because a one-off campaign's usually, you gotta clear out this mansion full of zombies, or dragging up in the mountain fucking with people.
You gotta clear out this mansion full of zombies, but at the same time, will your brother's marriage to his sister go off without a hitch?
They're actually the ones getting married in the village, and you're here in advance to make sure it's a good location.
Also, I definitely just said, will your brother get married to his sister without a hitch? And I don't know what you got going on in your family, but that's messed up.
Well, if it's a mansion full of zombies, I had my assumptions.
Medieval nobles.
Yeah,
Happen
gotta
all the
keep the
time.
bloodline pure.
Sure.
Oh, God.
Which one? There's plenty to choose from.
It's true. There's literally so many gods in D&D.
Wasn't one of you talking about having a character that was atheist?
I've talked about that before. Building a character who's atheist in the world of D&D, just because, like, atheists in our world make a certain amount of sense, because, like, we don't have any direct evidence you can pull from to prove that gods exist. Atheists in D&D are fascinating to me, because, like, acts of divine intervention happen on a daily basis, so I love the idea of building a character, not just an atheist, but, like, a fighter who not only doesn't believe in gods, but doesn't believe in magic, and tries to explain away everything that he sees. Is like, oh, I know I just saw you shoot fire from your hands, but clearly you've got, like, some sort of, like, candle up your sleeve, and you just threw a whole bunch of, like, sawdust, and the sawdust caught on fire.
Kind of in that same vein, there's a character I've created that I haven't got the chance to play, but it's a paladin that I made, whose whole thing is he's just kind of, like, lost, like, the feeling of, like, God's work and all that stuff. So he's not an atheist, he just doesn't care to do the work anymore, but the God hasn't given up on him. So his whole thing is you play him with not really trying anything, so he's just, barely even swinging his sword, and, like, why bother, and, like, not being as boisterous when he's casting spells. But the God keeps helping him. To like, come on, you can do this, buddy. Come on, I don't give up on you. He's like, why don't bother?
Like, you have the potential. Don't stop now.
The whole story, you probably have his whole backstory about, getting back his like faith and like the feeling of like I can make a difference instead of just like we're all gonna die anyways.
Life is meaningless. We all must perish in the end. Meanwhile, my character's over there like, yeah, I agree. God doesn't exist. Everything's a lie.
I guess I'll smite.
Holy ray comes down from the sky. What does your atheist have to say about that?
Yeah, the sun is shining this evening.
Role-playing your character, there's the two sides of it as well. A lot of people like to get right into it. You're acting out the character. And then there's, of course, the people that don't really care too much for role-playing. It's like, my character does this, my character does this. Both equally valid, but that's kind of... You have to figure out what your party wants to do. If you have some of the people in your group that want to, like, be really into it, and the other group half doesn't want to, that's kind of a discussion you have to have with your party.
Because it's going to ruin it for both people. Because if I'm on a table, and I'm, like, super into it, and I'm going, like, foul fiends, we shall defeat you! And then the person across the table is like, yeah, alright,
I say yes.
I stab at the... What did you call them? Foul fiends? Yeah, I stab at the foul fiends with my sword. It's going to immediately break the immersion for me over here getting super in character. At the same time, if, like, I'm in the mindset of, like, we're just going to kind of, like, hang out and, like, alright, cool, I'll swing my battle axe at him. And, like, most of the people at the table are in that mindset. And then there's one person at the table like, yes, we have found the dragon at last and we are in their hovel. It's just like, come on, man. We're all just having a good time here. You don't need to, like, get super fucking intense with it.
Knave, you dare speak to me this way? I'll have you know I'm from a grand noble house. Yeah, shut up, Steve.
Yeah, we get it. You're from fucking Bedford and nobody cares.
That's funny.
So yeah, classic line of, like, read the room. Know what your party's into and what your group is doing. And, like, both of them are super enjoyable. Both of them are great ways to play the game. But, like, try and have everyone on the same page. Because if one person's doing something different from everyone else at the table, or if your party's split in two, it just kind of ruins it for both groups. One person's super into it and no one else is getting on board. It's just going to be boring for them. And it's going to be exhausting for everyone else.
Yeah. And everyone else playing has a different idea. I feel one of the biggest hurdles being a player is when you first start off, realizing that the story doesn't revolve around your character, but the party. It's more on the DM to figure out how they're going to interwove the story so that each character has their moment. But you have to realize that sometimes as a player, during a big event, you're going to be kind of the one sitting back narratively.
Yeah, you have to kind of accept that while you're here for the story and you're going to enjoy the story is not necessarily there for you. You're going to participate in it, but it wasn't written around your character. The same reason why I don't like it when people write 6-page backstories with tons of intricate detail, because the moment they do that, they're signaling to me that they want this backstory to play heavily into the campaign, and they want the campaign to be based around their backstory. And that's just not what the campaign's about. The campaign's about making sure everyone's having a good time, players and DM included, not making sure one specific player has a really good time.
Oh, yeah, and while you're playing, you have to make that understanding to, right now we're doing a story that's involving this character's backstory. I'm not going to have a major effect on that, but I'm going to do what I can to help that character accomplish his goal. And you can even address that as your character. It's like, this is important to my friend who I've been journeying with for so long.
Yeah.
I'll do whatever I can to help them. I'm not going to make this about me instead.
Yeah.
Or
what's that? Your parents are possessed by ghosts? That's a shame. Reminds me of the time that I had to deal with something like this.
Your parents are trying to sell your soul to Satan. I don't know. Like, I don't really care. I'll still get to keep adventuring. All right.
My soul's worth at least twice as much as yours, so I don't know why they want my soul instead. Yeah. Also, don't kill your friend's parents in that situation unless you have to.
No.
You don't end that situation. It's like, I got a solve for this.
I got a solution. You don't have a soul if you're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, I did kill Peter's character once to stop from stealing his soul.
Yeah, but to be fair, he was a vampire, so he respawned back at the guild house, but,
Yeah, I didn't stay dead.
But I completely, emotionlessly slit your throat.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm only like 60% sure that you believed I would come back.
It was a gamble, but better than a demon walking around.
Yep.
Like, yeah, because we were both tieflings, and one of us had to be sacrificed.
Yeah,
I was like, and I was just sitting there like, I really want to save my brother, but I don't want to die yet. And, Keith here is just trying to figure out something he can do to, just throw this Demon Lord's plans just right out the window. And then I just muttered to myself, wait, he's a vampire. And then Keith's like, he is.
I don't know if I heard that, because I just walked up and slit his throat.
So the story was that my character was a descendant of the demon lord of hell, and that demon lord was trying to enter our world. But in order to enter our world, he needed a vessel on our world who was his descendant. So he had captured me, and he was planning on preparing me to host his soul. And so, yeah, you guys had this little discussion, and you decided to slit my throat, because if I'm not alive, then he can't have my body. The thing you forgot about, though, in the moment, Matt was my direct brother, so the moment I was dead, the demon wars was like, yeah, I got another descendant in the room, guys, and immediately trapped Matt in a force cage so that no one could get to him.
And I couldn't slit his throat because of it.
Yeah.
I forgot.
You still would have if you could have.
I thought about it, I'll be honest.
I remember there was a box. I just thought you were in the box, but then I forgot. Wait, how did he get a knife into the box?
The box didn't exist around me, it existed around you.
Right.
Yeah, and there's so many great moments as a player in the game that you experience that are kind of hard to like have a DM set up the moment for. It's more of you playing the moment, and the DM is kind of just forced situation, has to go with it. I wasn't the player in situation, but it was in the Arngrim campaign that we did, where we had two players, Thomas and Tyler, and they were friends, like their characters were friends for the longest time, and then there was this schism where some players ended up on the bad side, some ended up on the good side. And in this moment, at the time, the character played by our friend Tyler got the power of hatred, I believe it was.
Yeah, started to become the demon lord of hatred at the time.
So one of the abilities he got, which was Homebrewed, was he could ignite people's hatred and make them aggressive against the thing they hate the most.
I remember where
And
this
our
was going.
friend Thomas's character hated magic with a passion. He wanted to wipe it off the face of the earth. And at this point, he was so wealthy that he had bought a bunch of anti-magic artifacts, melted it down into a chariot that he was riding into battle, and he saw Tyler's character, was charging right at him, but there was also a unit of mages off to the side. So Tyler's like, I got it. I'm going to activate his hatred and make him attack the mages, and I get off scot-free. Little did you know, when he triggered it, the thing that he saw that he hated the most at that moment was his friend for the longest time that actively betrayed him, and he ran him down with the chariot.
Not only his friend who, for the longest time, who actively betrayed him, but also a known magic user, so still playing into his hatred of magic.
There's a mage who betrayed me. Personal vendetta amplified.
Like, I definitely didn't think of that, what's it called? The trolley car experiment, which was that situation, but the Tom was like, oh, he hates you the most.
Yep. So another example, one of my favorite moments, actually from when I was playing, it was from Mr. Timness, as I played him in a future campaign, because, as I said, I did not last in that first campaign because I didn't like the group, but I decided to try and recreate him in a later campaign. At this point, I just started referring to him as Toby, so he was Toby Timness, but that was a dumb name, so I just called him Toby. But Toby became to be a slightly powerful spellcaster over time, to the point where, someone just, happened to be mentioning the fact that, bandits were, plaguing the village, and Toby was like, okay! And Toby just walked away, and I was like, I don't know what's going on, because it was, pretty, I think we had, a couple party members die beforehand, a couple sessions before, so no one in the party knew Toby super well and understood that Toby saying okay meant that Toby was going to go solve the problem. So everyone was, everyone in out-of-character understood what was happening, no one in character understood what was happening, so no one stopped me. And so, later on, I, messaged the DM privately what's going on. And then later on, the party goes to the bandit camp to try and, eliminate the bandits, to find that it's just gone. Because Toby just went there and teleported the entire camp into a different dimension so that they can't bother the town anymore.
I was expecting to see, a grizzled murder site, and then Toby come back covered in blood.
Or, a crater from meteors.
Toby got a little bit bloody at certain points, but no, in this one specific situation, he was just like, oh, they're bothering you? I will literally send them to hell for you.
On that topic, we've all played quite a few characters. Well, maybe not so much as Matt, but we've played plenty of it. Out of all the moments of you playing in a campaign, do you have, a moment that stands out as, your character's most badass moment? Or, just stupid?
See, it's not fair that you phrase it that way, Keith. Because my character has a bunch of stupid moments, and I'm hugely fond of them.
Oh, no, it's not, what, a big moment that you feel was, very like awesome, crazy, stupid, like the best moment you can think of where you've role played a character.
Yeah. So this one wasn't from actual D&D, but it was from a campaign of a tabletop role playing game. I think we talked about this during our DM's perspective campaign, our podcast. But still, my favorite fucking moment of role playing any character was when I was role playing as the Iron Flamingo in our superhero themed campaign, and my character finds out that his adoptive daughter has been captured by the military, and rather than telling any of the superheroes around him who would happily go help him, he just tells them all he has to leave because he has to pick his daughter up from school, and then breaks into a military base to rescue his daughter, and then leaves with her.
Also, I feel like I should point out this time that his daughter was also a superpowered individual, and at this time, the superpowered individuals were being hunted by the government for crimes that they may or may not have committed.
Yes. So we were all very wanted. I walked myself into a military base that was actively searching for me to rescue my daughter, who was herself a superpowered individual. Yes, I think that was probably one of my favorite ridiculous moments as a character.
Well, from the DM perspective, my favorite part about that too was your character's reaction when you found out this information wasn't like, oh no, or anything. It was literally your character stood up at the table, said, well, I gotta go pick up my daughter from school, and just left.
Yeah.
Didn't tell the other rest of the party what was going on or anything. He just said, gotta go pick up my daughter from school.
There were a lot of great moments in that campaign, just built around the fact that my character was very dumb. Well, not very dumb, but pretty dumb. An example of one of these wasn't even me role-playing the character, it was you role-playing the character on my behalf, because I was running late to a session, and so you just said that I was sitting in my supersuit at the table, I just wasn't talking.
Yeah.
And then I ended up running a lot later than I thought I would, so I missed the whole meeting that they were having. So when I finally got there, we just kind of role-played a little bit and decided that I had left my supersuit at the conference table in a seated position, and I was currently in the bathroom taking a dump.
Yeah.
And so I just missed the whole meeting, and everyone assumes I'm there taking part in the conversation, and I'm just not there for any of it.
Yeah, I think the time was you actually got there just as the meeting ended. And I said, and then we were talking via text over the situation. Then as soon as you enter the room, you're like, and my character now enters from the bathroom.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
You got any of those, Matt?
Nothing nearly as spectacular as that. And just like Peter, my favorite moment, role-playing wise, I already mentioned in the previous Dungeons & Dragons episode we covered, where my character was pretending that he had died a couple years ago, and I was playing as a different character undercover.
Yeah.
But my favorite role-playing moment was from that same campaign. That was probably the first... It was the second role-playing campaign, not Dungeons & Dragons, that I had ever done. But it was the first time that I actually felt like I actually role-played a character well. Because my character was the same character who had pretended he was dead. But at the very beginning, the very first session, his very first interaction with another player... Because he woke up in this town without any memories of his past. All he had was a mask. So he just kind of made a name for himself as a mask salesman. He'd carve these masks, which people started to find disturbing because they were oddly lifelike, and these creepy rumors started spreading around him that he would make them act out of actual people's faces or people's skin.
As you do.
Yeah. And so just playing to the creepy rumors that were circulating around the town, I was headed to the library to do some research into magic. And I get to the library, the door's closed. I don't see any open or closed sign on the library, so I look over, the window's open. Me being the 7-foot-tall, hunched-over guy with the giant backpack on, just stretches his way in through the window. The librarian, another player at the time, just looks over, he's like, "Excuse me, sir, the door is right there." I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry, beg your pardon." I back out the window, and then just come in the front door.
Do you have a favorite moment of role-playing as a character?
So this one was actually a cleric I was playing. This one was...
Oh, I think I know the story, but I love it anyways.
Was a worshiper of light. Now, this was in actually a module book. I believe it was Rise of Tiamat. I can't remember where you and a bunch of travelers are coming into the town that's attacked by a dragon, and there's Fulan.
Horde of the Dragon Queen.
Horde of the Dragon Queen. So in that part, there's a point in the campaign when you're going into the town to try to rescue survivors, and there's a group of people holed up in a church surrounded by kobolds. So the plan was that at this time the party had I think it was a ranger, a rogue, a wizard, and 2 fighters. So me and the 2 fighters realized, oh, well, we can't sneak the people to the back of the church with all these kobolds around it, so we need a distraction. Me being a light cleric, I can easily make distractions. I can make things low, cause a lot of noises. So, at this point, we weren't quite sure of what the level of the kobolds were going to be to us, as we didn't really get much combat, so we were playing it relatively safe. So the group idea was the ranger and the rogue were going to sneak in through the back, jump the wall, get into the back of the church, and sneak the people out, while the rest of the party in front of the church caused a major distraction. So we had our wizards shooting off thaumaturgy, I was making things glow, we were screaming and hollering, and the kobolds come at us. Fight breaks out, and I cast one of my cantrips, Burning Hands. And the kobold drops instantly. And I'm like, wait a second. So I run in and just start burning hands the whole thing. Like, just screaming like crazy, just laughing my ass off as I'm burning them. At this point, the people in the back had run into a small issue, and they heard the commotion up front. So the rogue decides to come up front to see what's going on, to see if he needs help. He comes out to the situation of me spinning around, shooting flaming hands, burning kobolds alive, and we're just, like, me and the party just murdering these kobolds in the front, and the other player goes, I don't want to deal with this, and just walks back in the direction.
So I thought you were going to tell a different story, which I believe is from the same campaign, because you talked about this campaign before off the podcast, which is one of my favorite moments that I like to tell other people of great examples of role-playing, which was you and the rogue had some disputes in the past because the rogue was a worshiper of the moon and you were a worshiper of the sun.
Yeah.
And at one point, I don't remember the exact circumstances, but the rogue decides they're going to sneak down a hallway, and as they do, they make like a slight prayer to the god of moon before they leave. And that really upsets you. So you cast light on them just as they're about to sneak away, so they literally glow and attract attention to anything they were going to try
I
to
gave
sneak
them
past.
disadvantage on all of their stealth checks for the rest of that session.
Yeah. Oh, spectacular.
I mean, that character, I had so many good role-playing moments just because, like, that was more of me just... I don't want to say screwing around, but the campaign in the group didn't call for much seriousness.
Yeah.
So there was a part where we had to interrogate one of the guys that worked for Foulon in that situation. I had to find him because it just happened that my backstory was the one that was tied to him. So to find out where the person was, we had a Dragonborn in our group, and Dragonborns can be scary to people. So what happened is I got him to open his mouth, put the guy's head into the guy's mouth, and said, "Now tell me where Foulon is." Got advantage on my interrogation.
Can't imagine why.
Yeah, I guess that just kind of wraps up what we were talking about. Any final comments you want to share?
No, just if you are planning on starting D&D and you want to know how to build a character, just kind of do what we talked about. So focus more on the story and less on the mechanics, but also like know what kind of mechanics work and what kind of mechanics don't. And, like, just kind of fuck around with it a little bit, and you'll learn with time.
Yeah, you play with it till you break it.
Yeah.
Just read the descriptions and choose what you like the sound of.
Yeah.
And just all the rest of the knowledge just comes from there. Well, thank you for listening to our podcast. It can be found on all major podcast services. Tune in 2 weeks from now for the next episode when that's released. And if you liked what you heard, please give us a like, subscribe if you care, and leave a comment, or you can email us with any suggestions or corrections at whatismypodcastabout@gmail.com. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys. Yeah, we get it. You're from fucking Bedford and nobody cares.